All right, what's going on, Macro Perspective peeps? Man, I'm super stoked for this episode. Marcos and I are going to super nerd out. I think y'all are too. So if you want to, grab your notebooks, grab the transcript from this, put it into LLM. It's about to go down because our guest today is Brady Holmer, who is an amazing exercise science researcher, physiologist, all these things, and has his book, VO2 Max, which we've talked about VO2 Max here quite often. But I think having Brady on, because I got to reach out to him listening to Dr. Rhonda Patrick's podcast, and he was a guest speaker on there. And one of the crazy things about it was that episode was probably one of the best VO2 master classes I've ever seen. People talk about VO2, VO2 Max. I wanted to get Brady on today, and I really appreciate him. Brady, thank you so much for coming on today. Would you mind just sharing with people who you are, how you got into this field, a little intro, get some questions in there, and we'll go deep into this conversation.
Yeah, let's do it. First of all, Seamus, Marcos, thanks for inviting me on. A little bit of a background. So I have a bachelor's degree in exercise science and then a master's degree in human performance, which is exercise science adjacent, but it sounds like much cooler, human performance. So a master's degree from the University of Florida, go Gators, graduated, I think about 3 years ago at this point. After I graduated, I decided not to go the route of academia, and I actually started working for a company called Examine.com. Maybe you've heard of them, but they started off as like a supplement science company, and not in terms of the fact that they sold supplements, but they write about supplements, telling you what works, look at the evidence behind this. So kind of an unbiased perspective. They were venturing then into like just writing about everything: diet, exercise, giving gradings on the stuff, like basically telling you what should you do if you want X health goal or X performance goal. So I got a job with them. I started working for them full time, just reading research, writing about research on supplements and exercise, and really just kind of fell in love with that, just like reading science all day long. There's really nothing that was more fun to me because it was kind of something I was already doing as a hobby. And then a couple of years after working for them, I got a job offer from Dr. Rhonda Patrick. So you just mentioned I was on Dr. Rhonda Patrick's podcast twice at this point for, discussing various concepts related to exercise. And my main role there right now is narrative science lead. So I sort of, my job is to keep an eye on like what's happening in the longevity and the health span space and say like, this is what we should cover for a deep dive episode. These are the guests that we should cover now. This is what we should cover in the newsletter. So just really kind of being the not like the end all be all, because she obviously has the end say, but like, hey, this is something that we should probably cover. This is kind of the state of the science on stuff. So just loving working for her and the team there. And then in my spare time, I'll call it, I do write a Substack newsletter again, which is similar to my full-time job. I'm just reading science, kind of translating it, digesting it, telling people what the important stuff is and how they can apply it. And I'm also an endurance athlete, so I run marathons. I run any distance really, but marathons kind of these days are my primary race distance. So I've been competing in that my entire life and really loving that. So got my feet in a lot of different stuff, but all of it is related, which is a lot of fun. I don't think there's every aspect of my life is kind of interwoven and just whether it's science or health or exercise. And there's really nothing more fun. And I know you guys probably have the same perspective, but this is just such an interesting area these days. Everybody seems to be interested in it. There's a lot of science coming out. So it's a very exciting time.
Yeah.
Speak for yourself, Brady. I don't find longevity interesting at all anymore.
Nobody wants to live long. It's all about living well, right? Quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity. I mean, quality years I think would matter a lot more. The more I've actually wrestled with this idea of living for longer periods of time, I don't necessarily know if there's like an exact number that makes sense to me. And maybe that's just like some of the isms, if you will, from like Outlive. I'm going to call them Outlive-isms, the medicine 3.0 type of idea. To me, I feel like part of the book that was actually like the most profound was the stuff that people were actually mad about, which was him talking about like the relatability of like the other things that matter, that he learned to matter more as he like kind of was on that conquest or on, trying to figure that stuff out. So like part of the book, when some people here recently have actually brought it up, I actually was like, part of the book I actually like the most is like the last third. And they're like, wait, what? And I was like, yeah, like when your day to day is literally talking about all the things that can help you live longer or metrics that are like, associated with it, kind of starts to bore you after a while. So I kind of like
You
getting
look at like 300 plus biomarkers to 1,000. You just kind of go like, it's just data at this point.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting there. I have felt this shift in the last like 5 years in the longevity space. I feel like we went through this very biomarker centric calorie restriction, protein restriction, like lower your thyroid to live longer space. And now it's like longevity is synonymous with like vitality, eating a lot of protein, social relationships, mental health. And, I do credit Peter Attia and, even then like Rhonda Patrick, Andrew Huberman, all the big podcasters for that. But I feel like we sort of kind of flipped the script in terms of like, yeah, people still want to live long, but living long doesn't mean, calorie deprivation, living in the what was it called? Like the biosphere thing where people are like, I mean, I guess it's like the Brian Johnson approach. Like that's not
Yeah.
really what a lot of people are considering like longevity medicine these days. It's like, how long can we live, but it vitally and, having a good time versus
Yeah,
depriving oneself.
like how do I say it? It's like leading indicators, right? Like,
Mhm.
oh, like I'm gonna optimize these biomarkers, but it's like, is that necessarily like the leading indicator of why you're living long and a well life, or are you living a well life because you already do those things and some of the biomarkers just come along with it, you know?
Absolutely.
It's like the obsession with biological age with everybody these days. Like I feel like that's been like the newest one that's been the last 6 to 12 months. And they like try to approach, chronological versus biological. And I'm just like, based on what? It's like a bunch of theoretical, actuarial kind of science that is going on that doesn't really have any validity, even though they like are claiming that there is. Like to me, it just feels like a little hokey. And that's just being in the space for the last, I mean, what, 7, 8? How long have I worked here? I don't even remember. It's like been like
You've
8
been here for
years.
a while, dude. You've been there for a while.
I know. Well, watching the evolution of it and what people are interested in, I think is like kind of profound because, biomarkers were kind of telling the story and then VO2 took a back seat. And then now it's like VO2 gained a lot of popularity. And so obviously, as we drive the conversation more towards that, and kind of get, some of that insight there, I don't know. I find it fascinating if that, like you said right before we got on here, like some people are saying or claiming that it's not really a marker for quote
Yeah.
longevity at this point. Which I'm like, okay, well now inquiring minds will wonder, like, who's saying that, Brady? Because I haven't heard it, but maybe you're a little bit more on the pulse of that because that's what you write about quite.
Before Brady, before you let's answer that question, and
Okay.
then I'm gonna have some follow up questions because we're gonna go deep into VO2. But
Yeah,
I
because
have to
yeah,
save my first question for this like deep dive.
yeah, I'll try not to take us down too much of a rabbit hole with that. But so I guess when I say that there are some people saying that VO2 max isn't a marker of longevity, but what they're kind of arguing is that you don't need to get a VO2 max test, or you don't actually need to know your VO2 max because that has not been correlated with longevity. Because when you take a handful of these studies that have shown the association of VO2 max with mortality, people with higher VO2 max have a lower risk of death, lower rate of all-cause mortality. When you take apart some of these studies, some of them didn't directly measure VO2 max. In other words, they measured treadmill performance, so like how long somebody lasted on a treadmill, and then they used an equation to predict their VO2 max.
Gotcha.
Or they used metabolic equivalence of tasks to estimate VO2 max. So they didn't really push participants to their max. Maybe they didn't measure gas exchange directly, so they didn't actually have oxygen consumption. So the argument is that all these studies are just using a proxy measure of VO2 max and not really VO2 max. Ergo, you don't need to measuring your VO2 max if you're just somebody who's interested in living longer is sort of useless. You don't need to go get this expensive test. I was kind of then pushing back a little bit because yes, obviously some of those studies are right and the people picking them apart are valid in their assessment, but there are other studies that have used direct measures of VO2 max and they associate it with all-cause mortality, and this is a post I'm probably going to write soon because it's been all on my mind lately, but all-cause mortality is kind of just one endpoint. I mean, there are plenty of studies measuring VO2 max directly that show lower cardiovascular disease risk, lower diabetes risk. VO2 max is predictive of better brain health, less Alzheimer's disease, just on and on and on. So I think they have a valid, argument against it. And yes, your average person probably doesn't need to go into a lab and get a VO2 max test, but I think it's useful information. I think it's very useful information. I mean, heck, I wrote a book on it on VO2 max and saying that it's probably valuable to go get a test. And given that they're pretty accessible and relatively inexpensive these days, it's like that's a pretty potent health metric that someone could be interested in and probably get measured. I mean, it's a couple $100. It's, you're going to pay for a blood panel to get some biomarkers measured. It's going to cost you about the same. And VO2 max, I would argue, is infinitely more valuable than, a single like blood test maybe that you're going to get.
I'm gonna take us back. I really appreciate that answer. I think that really makes sense, and I appreciate you showing both sides and arguing for both. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. I'm gonna bring us back though, because now we're gonna start the conversation to what VO2 max is. So for the folks listening, take out your take out your notebooks. But Brady, real quick, and this is something I've done on a podcast too. But like, can we define some terms first off before we even get to max? What is VO2?
Yeah, VO2.
Hold on, real quick.
Oh, go ahead.
Where do people see VO2 day to day? And then why would they need to then see where their max is and how it applies to their day to day? So I'm gonna let you rip on this one because that's 3 questions back to back.
That's a great question. So VO2, when you see that abbreviation, that just means volume of oxygen. So O2 being oxygen, but it's just oxygen consumption. How much oxygen is your body utilizing to create energy? To answer your question of where do you see it from day to day, we see it everywhere in day to day. I mean, oxygen, we're aerobic. We live because we can respire, we can breathe in oxygen, and we use that oxygen to create ATP, ATP being the energy currency of our cells. So literally from the moment you wake up, I mean, even when you're asleep, I guess you have a VO2, but from the moment you wake up, you are consuming oxygen and producing energy. And so that's going to vary based on the intensity of activity that you're doing. So when you walk downstairs to make coffee, your VO2 is not that high. When you walk up the stairs, it increases a little bit. When you're doing your exercise, then it's substantially elevated and then maybe even elevated for a little bit afterwards. So VO2, you're always using VO2 or oxygen throughout the day. So your VO2 is literally, the oxygen, the energy you're using to live.
I
So
love it.
obviously important because we are aerobic beings.
This is
Even when you're doing anaerobic activity, I'll put anaerobic in quotes because it's like the stupidest term, but you're still aerobic. You're still producing energy aerobically all the
Well,
time.
it's a great answer. I love how you use like the sleep to going up and down the stairs. I think if people were to look at like a chart, right, and if it was from like left to right on a VO2 scale, if VO2 is intensity going up and then like activities on the bottom, at the bottom that would be like laying down. You're not using as much, then it scales up to a little bit of like walking around the house, doing dishes, going up the stairs, and then maybe, going for some exercise, maybe some light exercise, and then more aerobic stuff, and then to the max stuff. And that scale can be from, I don't want to say zero because it's not absolute, but it's like zero to like into the 80s or something like that. And that basically would correlate to that VO2 depending on how you measure it. But I love using that scale just to show people like, hey, this is where you probably land, and we'll get to the max. But if this is where you're at right now and you're struggling to get the stairs up or like doing laundry, oh man, we're tapping into that battery a little bit, So, but yeah, go ahead, continue to the VO2 max and kind of like how a VO2 max would be assessed and where people fall in that and everything.
Yeah, sure. And one more interesting thing on that. So I don't know if either of you have an Aura ring. I'm assuming maybe you do, just given kind of the spaces you're in. But so what I love about Aura Ring, and maybe some of these other apps have it, is that every single day it gives me a tracing of my heart rate. Like, what is my heart rate at various times during the day? So I get this cool little curve on my app at the end of every single day. And if people have an Aura Ring or if they have another app that can basically just show their heart rate continuously throughout the day, heart rate is very related to VO2. So if you see those little heart rate spikes, well, that's where your like oxygen consumption is going to be increasing as well. So just a little interesting like observation that somebody could probably make, like a continuous glucose monitor basically, but for oxygen consumption. Maybe that's coming. Maybe one of these days we'll have a continuous VO2 monitor. That would be awesome. You just have to wear a mask all day, but
that would put a whole field into like it'd be a
whole
new field.
I mean, they have portable VO2 monitors these days, but it's like this weird looking mask that you would have to wear everywhere.
VO2 Master, I love that one. I love playing with it. It was cool.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so yeah, let me get to VO2 max. So VO2, I said, was the volume of oxygen that your body's consuming. VO2 max is your body's maximal rate, your body's maximal ability, or your maximal rate of oxygen consumption. And typically that's, not typically, but anytime, that's going to be achieved during maximal exercise. So it's the fastest rate. And I want to emphasize rate because some people say it's like the most oxygen you can consume, which is technically accurate, but it's a rate. So it's milliliters of oxygen per kilogram of body mass per minute. So it's typically expressed relatively. You could also do liters per minute, liters of oxygen per minute, but it's a rate. So it's how quickly your body can take in oxygen. So you breathe in oxygen from the environment into your lungs, take in oxygen, transport that oxygen through your blood to the rest of your body, and then turn that oxygen into ATP in the form of, or energy in the form of ATP. So we can think about the whole oxygen cascade maybe just quickly. You breathe in air, it goes into your lungs, oxygenates your blood, your heart pumps, distributes it to your muscles, oxygen diffuses, from the muscles to the capillaries, and then ATP is created. That was basically a quick and dirty overview of the oxygen cascade. So yeah, and back to the max though. Yeah, it's the, your maximal rate of oxygen consumption. And so if you have a VO2 during the day, the VO2 max, you could think of it as like your ceiling. This is the most oxygen you're going to consume at the highest level of exercise that you can get to. And so it's typically going to be measured on a treadmill or a bicycle test to exhaustion. Maybe some of your listeners have done this, maybe not, but essentially you'll get on a treadmill. The person running the test will increase the speed and increase the grade of the treadmill, making it steeper gradually and gradually. Test takes about 15 minutes, but basically they're just going to keep getting faster and steeper until you hit a point where you say, I can't go anymore. Like, this is it. I'm tapping out. Ideally, at that point, they're going to be measuring your oxygen consumption. You're going to be breathing through this mask throughout the entire test. They're going to be measuring your body's oxygen consumption. They can do that because you can measure how much oxygen's coming in versus the percent going out, and then calculate sort of how much you've consumed, how much your skeletal muscles have consumed. And ideally, at the end of that test, what you'll see is, as you get more intense, you're going to see this line go up. Your oxygen consumption goes up, 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 up as you get more intense. Eventually, it's going to plateau because that's a max. So when you see that plateau, that's kind of the defining criteria of VO2 max, because you hit this oxygen consumption plateau. Even if my treadmill goes steeper and even if I start running faster, I'm not going to consume more oxygen because my body simply can't anymore. That's when you technically lean into the anaerobic. Now you're producing energy more. All the extra energy you're producing is coming without oxygen anaerobically.
Brilliant.
It's not a fun test at all, but luckily it only lasts about 15 minutes. But I've done probably 4 or 5 of them throughout my entire life. And yeah, they're never fun, but it's over quickly. That's the only good thing about them, I guess.
What kind of mask did you have to wear for your tests?
Oh man, I wore one of those traditional ones. So I've done both. I've done the one that's like a snorkel that you have in your mouth, but I've also worn the one that just goes over your nose and your mouth, which are way more comfortable, and I prefer that.
Yeah.
True. Do you
The
think they'll ever
Parvo.
get to the Parvo, Parvo and Core ones both use it these days. But for whatever reason, people are like always complaining about like that mask on my face is like the thing that I hate the most. And then they're like, why hasn't somebody figured out a better mask solution to this thing? And I was like, come to think of it, I don't know. I mean, this is just, it's mostly been in an exercise lab. So like this works. It's easy to retrofit, yada, yada. And then I was thinking about like how they can get more of like one of those scuba ones that kind of go all the way around from here to there. Like, I feel like Brady, if you're looking for your next venture, man, like if you can figure out a way to get a better mask for all these tests, I bet you'd make a killing.
Well, here's always been my idea. I'm like, why don't we just have like an astronaut helmet that people can wear during it? Because there's no leakage. With some of the masks, what some of the problems are is that unless that seal is like super tight, you're going to get some leakage of oxygen, and that's going to skew the measurements. So just put a big glass bubble over my head and seal it at the neck, or maybe even wear an entire suit, and you're gonna get everything. So that's kind of been my idea. Somebody can feel free. I'm not an inventor, so if anybody hears this and is like, I want to invent this, go for it. That's kind of always been my idea. It seems like it would be a little more comfortable unless you're claustrophobic, but
yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the biggest thing I run into when administering the test is that a lot of people will complain about like, I can't get there, you know what I mean? Because I feel claustrophobic with this on my face. It feels restricted. I was like, technically you're not, I was like, and if you were having a panic attack, I would tell you to breathe into a bag anyways. So you're already there. You're already halfway there. But I try to make light of that situation as I go to administer the test for people, because I did experience that the first time I did. I was like, I'm clammy. I'm a little freaked out right now. This is uncomfortable, especially when you're breathing heavy, and that first iteration of test, right?
Yeah, I mean, with the snorkel like device or that goes in your mouth, it's really uncomfortable. Like it's not fun.
Oh, yeah.
So
That's what I tell them about that alternative. They're like, okay, this one sounds a little bit better than that. And I was like, yeah, like at least we this is as luxurious as it gets when it comes to doing this from a longevity practice standpoint. And then two, so I'll say actually every test that I've administered has always been on a bike and not a treadmill. So, some defining characteristic differences, and maybe you can help educate me here. We do it because of orthopedic issues and the patient base. Obviously, we want them to be able to do it as they get into later years. I've administered a test on a 20-year-old, actually, I think as young as 18 and as old as 90. So, yeah, I got a lot of decades there, but you're mentioning more of like the traditional treadmill
Mhm.
version. And then I guess like administering the proper test on a bike, like how would you go about doing it if you were to devise a bike versus, the traditional treadmill? And yeah, I want kind of hear that, and then I can kind of give our insights as to like what we've done. Maybe
Yeah,
there's
sure.
modifications to make.
Sure. So regarding the different modalities, treadmill, you are almost always going to get a higher VO2 max score on a treadmill versus a bike, unless you are doing a VO2 max test on Tour de France cyclists who ride
Mm,
bikes for a living. That's simply because, I guess, two reasons. So most people know how to walk and or run. That's kind of our form of locomotion as humans. We walk and run. So everybody knows it. Everybody knows how to do it. Everybody does it. And yes, unless you have orthopedic issues, then there might be some considerations to make there. But for the most part, a lot of the protocols on the treadmill are just walking. People aren't going to be running, and you're just going to go steeper, steeper, steeper. Like you might get to 4 miles per hour, like a very brisk walk, but a lot of people aren't going to be running. It's mostly athletes who are going to be running. For a majority of people, you're going to get a higher score on the treadmill also because you're less efficient. So a bike is a very efficient form of physical activity because you don't have extraneous motion. You're just cycle, cycle, cycle. But on the treadmill, you're engaging arms and legs. So, arms are going to consume oxygen because you're moving them. People should not hold on to the side of the treadmill if you're administering a VO2 max test. So you're using legs, huge muscle mass, arms, more muscle mass, and there's inefficiencies. Everybody has inefficiencies in movement that are just going to elevate oxygen consumption when you're on the treadmill versus a bike. So the bike can work, but again, a lot of people aren't riding bikes hard and very often. Most people, as opposed to like most people are walking every day. So the bike is great because it does get around those orthopedic kind of issues that you mentioned. But if people aren't as familiar with riding a bike, they're just not going to be able to really hit that point of true exhaustion. True exhaustion. They might tell you that they're out, and that's probably
mm.
true, but their body's physiological max is probably not going to be able to achieve that on a bike like they would on a treadmill.
Percent increase, like how much higher would my VO2 be
Oh,
on a
geez.
treadmill versus a bike?
I'm not sure I can give an exact number there, unfortunately, because I don't have kind of enough experience comparing it. I mean, maybe a 2 to 5 ml per kg per minute difference, but that's just kind of me throwing something out there. So I really don't know the answer to that one.
2 to 5, so that'd be like anywhere from like a roughly a 5 to 10% increase then.
Maybe something like that, but that might be overstating that. So I'm sure there's data out there comparing the two, but
This is something that I've been like. That's why I like the VO2 Master compared to like some of these other ones, just because like something with the VO2 testing that I've been wanting to do more of. VO2 Master, give me one for free, dog. I don't want to pay thousands of dollars. It's like I got a ski erg right here. I got a bike erg. I like doing a rower. I like doing other things. I'd like to wear it and just try some other modalities of conditioning and see where I land with the quote unquote max. Because obviously, different machines and different apparatuses are just going to be different. That's just the nerd in me wanting to know. But it doesn't. I mean, knowing your VO2 max in these other formats doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be a better athlete. Like I have a good VO2 max. Doesn't mean I'm a good runner. You know what I'm saying? Like doesn't translate. But yeah, I really like being able to do the VO2 max Marcos like with like different tests like and all that. I think the bike, it's a 5 to 10%. I've even heard of like a 20% difference when I was doing my exercise science classes of like sub max variations being that much different. But yeah, it has to be like mode specific. If you get like what Brady was saying, like I had a cyclist come on and he was hitting like those 400 plus,
Mhm.
wattages, and he was probably getting close to his true potential. You know what I'm saying?
Mm.
Yeah,
Well,
runners should run, bikers should bike. But I mean, if you have somebody who's willing to do it, do both and just see. Maybe somebody's going to do better on a bike or better on like the treadmill. So I mean, I say why not do both? But if people are looking to go get one, my advice would be, what do you do more often? What are you more comfortable doing? Like which modality could you push yourself the furthest? And that's probably the one that you should do. The bike is just going to be limited just by that leg fatigue a lot of the time. It's just like, even before, I mean, I've been a runner my entire life and now I do a lot of cycling as well. But like before I started cycling, I just wouldn't be able to, my legs would just fatigue way before my true VO2 max was probably hit if I wasn't really trained on a bike.
Mm. Yeah, it's been an ongoing thought and question, because then it comes down to like, as we kind of, give some heart rate intervals relating to, aerobic threshold, anaerobic threshold, like target, like hit style heart rates, right? Again, like they would likely be different as a result of running or biking. And that's been kind of the hardest thing too. Like maybe I should just go find a bike, or sorry, a treadmill version to get some aerobic heart rates that would be a little bit more appropriate to like do a little more zone two, which again is like, again, am I splitting hairs here? Does it really actually, you know what? You're a runner, Brady. Like, do I really need to know what my actual number is, or does the talk test really like stand the test of time here?
Yeah, this is a question I get all the time. I get like 3 DMs on Twitter every single day asking about, sorry, it's X now, but 3 DMs on X every single day, just like about zone 2, because there's been, I mean, the discussion on zone 2 has been great. I think people are interested in it and whatnot, but it's created, I fear, like more confusion than it has clarity, because a lot of people are like, I mean, I just got a message the other day and somebody was asking, say, I go on runs with my friends and my heart rate is at like 160, but I'm holding a complete conversation and it's very comfortable. And I'm like, okay, well then that's like your zone 2 heart rate probably. I'm like, maybe you don't have lactate measurements. You've never done a test to determine your zones, but so I said, if you're talking comfortably, even if your heart rate's at 160, you probably just have a very high max heart rate and your exaggerated heart rate to exercise, and you're probably in zone 2. I think with zone 2, maybe one of those things where like the talk test is pretty reliable if you're, a regular exerciser, and you could probably do well just kind of going on that. I mean, you can get as nerdy and as granular as you want by measuring lactate, but I think the talk test is honestly a pretty good determinant. And even if it's not, I mean, if you can talk during exercise, maybe you're not in the quote unquote perfect zone 2, which I think is pretty ill defined anyway. Nobody can really define it that well. Does it really matter? Maybe not. If your lactate's at 2.2 versus 1.8, does it really matter that much? Not really, unless you're, trained to be the world's best in something, and that
Yeah.
0.1 millimolar difference matters.
Well, I do want to ask about this because we brought this up here. Is that variable there of being able to look at VO2 and the zones, right? The zone 2, like you just said, is a bit of a confusion. Why have we gotten a lot of confusion? I would argue a lot of the confusion around zone 2 training is around the concept that most of these studies are done on athletes that have a numerous amount of hours of doing a lot of volume, so they don't have to do that much intensity. But I can't necessarily apply that to a member base, right? Like with Marcus and I's work, where like, hey, this is what you should be doing. This is based off that data. Now, zone 2 is obviously important, but if someone's on a tight schedule and we do some high intensity stuff and they only have that ability, like, yeah, how would you argue for like the zone 2, and how would you argue for a zone 5? Just understanding that some of the science is from athletes, and we can't necessarily apply that to just general population, because I don't think there's enough general population studies for some of the zone 2 justification.
Yeah, there aren't as well. And I mean, there are 0 studies if we're just talking about, this is a study on the optimal training distribution for the general population to improve their VO2 max and, and with a sustainable regimen. There's 0 studies on that. This is something that I've talked about a lot because it's kind of like a myth. Myth might not be the right word, but like a myth that I want to put to rest with this 80-20 training principle that is typically goes around. It's the idea that, 80% of your training should be low intensity, 20% should be high intensity. And for one, well, to clarify one thing about that is I think a lot of people think about that in terms of time, but it wasn't in terms of time. It was in terms of session number. So 80% of the sessions in number during a week should be, say zone 2 or below. And then 20% of those should be, like a higher intensity. And where those studies came from were these observational studies of elite athletes. When you look at their training distribution, 80% of the sessions tend to lie in that zone 2 range. And then 20% of the sessions were like the higher intensity. So say zones 4 or 5. And so the first kind of my argument there was like, this wasn't a prescript. It was a post hoc finding where you look at the distributions and you derive this 80-20 versus these coaches are like, we're going to start the week and you're going to get 80% in this zone and 20% in these zones. So that's kind of the first error with that. And then the second one is, it came from these elite athletes. So if you're looking at Tour de France cyclists or marathon runners, okay, 15 to 20 hours, maybe up to 25 to 30 hours per week of training. So yes, of course, like maybe even 10 to 15% of that is going to be zone 4 or 5, because you just simply can't go hard like that much if you're doing 30 hours per week of exercise. When you look at what the average person is doing, it's probably if we just isolate aerobic exercise for the sake of our discussion, like let's leave strength training out of it, maximum probably 3 to 5 hours, which a lot of people are doing. And I say average, the average person's not doing 3 to 5 hours a week. The average person is doing maybe 150 minutes per week, but the average person who is interested in fitness is probably doing, maybe 3 hours per week. The very dedicated cardio person is going to be doing 3 to 5 hours per week. And if you then say, well, if you're on that upper end of that range, then maybe the 80-20 can kind of start to apply. If you're just having somebody who comes to you and says, I have 3 sessions per week that I can do 45 minutes to an hour, then my argument is, well, a majority, you don't have to make the whole session high intensity, but all of those days you should probably be incorporating some type of like higher intensity work. Maybe at least 2/3. So 2 out of 3 sessions a week should be of a higher intensity, just because you're going to need that to stimulate the adaptations that you want, the cardiovascular, the cardiac adaptations, the VO2 max improvements. And, the reason is, like, if you look at that, so take 20% of a 25-hour week training week, that's 4 to 5 hours of high intensity training. So these elite athletes, they're not doing little high intensity training. They're doing 5 hours per week of high intensity. So if you just want the person doing 3 or let's say 2 hours per week of aerobic exercise to do the 80-20, they might only be getting then 20 to 30 minutes of high intensity. That's not a lot. So that's why my argument is, they should probably be doing more of like a 2/3 probably high intensity. If you're doing 3 sessions per week, if you're doing 4 sessions per week, 2 or 3 of those sessions could incorporate some high intensity. Again, that doesn't mean going 80% of your heart rate max the entire time, but it means doing a few intervals, doing some surges, doing some strides, maybe doing 2 interval sessions. I just think that you should find ways to incorporate more intensity. The lower one goes in volume, the higher kind of the intensity can skew towards like higher intensity in that distribution.
I appreciate that insight. It kind of just comes to show, like, first off, like, this is where the performance versus longevity argument comes in.
Mhm.
We look at these athletes and they're like some of the greatest that we think, and we think, oh, these are guys are untouchable, or these people are untouchable. It's like, well, not the most elite are probably the most longevity based type people too. Remember, they're ripping their bodies apart. You know what I'm saying? So there has to be something there that people, we can't just take everything from the elites and try to mimic it. We have to really consider what's going on with us.
Yeah, and I've really stopped, or at least tried to stop engaging in these, because a lot of the exercise science coaches who, I'll just say, I won't say exercise science coaches, but like a lot of the coaches, they're going to argue with the health influences, and they're splitting hairs, and they're talking in 2 different directions. They're never going to come to a consensus, because the coaches they're training for a specific goal. If somebody wants to optimize their marathon performance, whereas you get people like Rhonda Patrick and Peter Attia and Andrew Huberman who are like, we're just trying to train for health span and longevity and maximize that. So like a lot of the training science is cross-disciplinary. You can take a lot of what we learn from elite athletes and apply it to the general public, but not all of it. And not all of these concepts like translate that well. And I think that the zone 2 kind of high intensity interval training stuff is one thing that just doesn't translate kind of as neatly over. And I'm kind of done trying to convince the coaches like, this is what I'm arguing instead of what you're arguing, because it's
No, I agree.
futile.
I've also had to like give some really hard people that were like really type A scientists, like some papers around Asia that were coming out like in the last few years of like only half the population probably like, like get some changes from zone 2 training. So most of us probably have to do some like high intensity stuff. So it's like, if you only got like a few sessions, you better go hard. You better make it count a little bit. And it doesn't mean like kill yourself, just means push a little.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's just one, like, they think that we're, telling people to do a Norwegian 4x4 protocol like 3 days a week. And like, that's not the case. Like, do it 1 day per week, but you can also I think there's this mindset that like a session is either high intensity or low intensity. But like, if I look at even my week when I'm training for, say, a marathon or something, I might have a day where I'm doing a 2-hour run. Okay, well, 90 minutes of that run is going to be zone 2, but I might do a few like harder intervals in that run. So that's a low intensity day, but I'm still doing some high intensity exercise during that run. So there's a lot of ways to do it without saying, yes, like every single day you go, you're just going to like blast yourself. Like, I don't think you need to do that. There are some people who might want to do that. Maybe you just have 15 minutes, like 3 times a week. If you only have that amount of time, go hard for 15 minutes, go as hard as you can for those 15 minutes. But otherwise, there's plenty of ways to get creative with this stuff.
Like you said, it's like a 4-to-1 ratio essentially of like their training, but their training time is so massive that, like, again, as soon as you move it down into a 3-hour window, that it almost does make more sense for it to kind of be tapped on maybe each of those sessions. Because one, if that's all, like if this person is a complete beginner, because what is it, like all of like 1%, upwards of 10% of the population in the US even exercises on a regular or consistent basis, right? So for them to go from 0 to 3 hours in each one of those sessions, they did, quote, 20 minutes of high intensity exercise, but during that they had an adequate amount of recovery in that high intensity sprint, right? Like I could see people maybe only doing 4 or 5 intervals, getting their heart rate elevated and jacked, lasting, all of like 2 minutes of actual work and 8 minutes of rest in that interval. Like if you get even like further down
Yeah,
the
exactly.
time span there.
You got to warm up, you got to cool down, you got recovery intervals. So the majority of that workout is spent in zone 1 or zone 2 probably, and then a little bit of it in like a zone 4 or a 5. But yeah, regarding the elite athlete like thing is, yeah, if you take, most of them are spending more time in the high intensity zone per week than the total amount of time anybody else is exercising. So that's kind of
Yeah.
my point there. It's like they're exercising maybe 4 or 5 hours of zone 4 or zone 5, and most of the population doesn't even exercise for half that in any zone at all.
I think that tracks even with like Olympic weightlifting too, because a lot of the times people are lifting at percentages of like, 70, 80%, right? But that's not saying that they're not, like, their sub maximal load is still really heavy and it's like, driving neural adaptation. But also too, they, in that week, they still have some max out sessions or ones that are touching that higher percentage, far greater than the average person that's in a 3-day-a-week split. I hadn't even really thought about it from like a total time allotment, because they're doing 2-a-days and they only take 1 day off, and total time under load is just massively different when you break it down that way.
Yeah, exactly. I think probably certainly a similar concept.
Yeah.
Yeah. Brady, I want to ask you this. I want to move the conversation to the performance. I know we talked about going back and forth, but I want to go into performance here a little bit, because I know we're probably all tapped into it. I know you're doing a marathon. My wife's doing the Chicago.
Awesome.
She's doing LA, and I like to do high rocks, and I don't know if that makes you look at me differently, but
no, not at all. It's something I've been interested in. Like and then the next couple of years, I'm going to do a high rocks. I've told myself that I'm just going to like train for one to do it because I'm kind of interested.
You're already ready. That's the thing.
I think I could be pretty decent at doing one. So yeah.
Yeah, like that's the thing. It's 50% of it's running.
Right.
If you have strength in your legs to push a sled and do some ski erg and some row erg, and then be able to like do that for 2 minutes and then run the same pace for your 1K, you're there, bro. Like you're literally.
If I were to Tim Ferriss the fuck out of this and say like, what do you need to spend the most time doing? You've already accomplished that with your marathon training. You just need to push a sled or something like that and burn some lactate, every so often in your week, and you'd be good to go. You probably would do better than me and Seamus that do more lifting based training.
I think so. I think if you have a running base, I think you'd kill it there. Just because if you're a runner and you just learn how to lift a little bit, like you kill it way more. Or like you obviously lift, but like more of the technical things, honestly. But one thing performance based, I would say. So this is also going to lean into some longevity. I'm going to bring it back to longevity, but like performance based, like, for someone that's going to be a performer that wants to do VO2 max, whether they're a marathon runner, a high roxer, an athlete of any type of caliber sport, really, let's just try to put the sports that rely on like VO2 max. It's probably like running, mechanics, and stuff like that. How can someone like, outside of training, do you know like what are some like techniques to like optimize VO2 max, how to augment it? Like, and I'm kind of going down the line of like, like supplementation, or like what are some things that people have done to change it a little bit that's like unorthodox, like things like that? Have you kind of like looked into that before?
Seamus, did you not hear what he said in the intro? He worked for Examine. He knows all this stuff.
He knows all the hacks.
You want the VO2 hacks, yeah. So it's interesting you bring that up, because that is really the stuff that I'm more interested in, because I'll do some coaching, some run coaching here and then, but like there are way smarter people, there are way smarter coaches than me out there who are deep in the science of training. And like, that's not really what I've spent any of my life studying, like how to design a training program. I mean, I have a background in that, obviously, like exercise science, human performance, but I don't spend most of my day doing that. So what I'm really more interested in is these tangents on, how to improve performance using like this other interesting science that's out there. That's really what excites me. Like Writing up a running
Same.
training plan doesn't really excite me that much. And there are a lot of people who are much smarter than me out there who can do that. So I kind of defer to those people when people are like, oh, what's the optimal interval protocol? It's like, yeah, I kind of know that, but that's not my area. So a couple things, I think. I'll start with supplements. I think there may be a few interesting supplements that can kind of augment VO2 max, either sort of directly or indirectly by like letting you train harder. And I think one of the ones that will indirectly do that kind of by letting you train harder, or maybe most of them probably do that, but is like nitrate or beetroot juice. So there's some pretty good evidence for that stuff in improving endothelial function, improving just oxygen carrying capacity. A lot of these studies are in people with cardiovascular conditions, so peripheral artery disease and things like that. It's definitely beneficial in them. There's no question about that. You give them beetroot juice and it's like their exercise capacity just goes way up. Trained athletes still benefits, probably a little bit less so, just because you think about an athlete, a runner who's already so optimized in terms of their oxygen delivery and their oxygen carrying capacity, that giving them beetroot to boost NO production just might not be as effective, but it still seems pretty darn effective in endurance athletes. So giving beetroot juice, and that's more of an acute thing, but chronically as well, just to amp up NO production, improve blood flow, could
How
help you,
much?
train harder. Man, again, it's going to be hard. A lot of these, there's so much variability in a lot of these studies in terms of like how much it'll help. And there's like some sex-based differences. There's maybe differences due to like genetics, whether some people are like metabolizing NO differently. It's going to be hard for me to like cite a percentage there too. So I'll probably hold off on doing that. I know people like percentages, like, oh, it'll, improve it by like
Give me
5%,
the
but
protocol, man.
well,
Give me
I
the
know, I'm so
protocol.
have
sorry.
you ever
Nuance.
been to Brady? Have you ever been to Whole Foods? They have these little like beetroot
Haven't ever been to
shots.
Whole Foods. I live in Austin, Texas.
Well, I don't know if they
We'll
have
come to
the
LA. I'll get you to Air One, okay, Brady? We'll level you up a little bit. Air One, dog.
No, but they used to have this beet shot, this little like like I think it was like a little bit concentrated, like Red Ace was the name of the brand. I don't know if it's there anymore. That's more of what I was getting at. And I swear to God, if I would take that before doing a CrossFit Open workout, about that 20-minute threshold, felt like I was just like oxygen was just getting absorbed at such a high level. Now, how much extract or things is actually in there, who knows? But like at least then it was like kind of the same thing every time. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, well, all those kind of NO boosters, so like L-citrulline, arginine, nitric, or beet juice, which has the nitrates that are then converted to nitric oxide. I mean, heck, people take Viagra before workouts because it like
I was gonna
improves
say,
blood
would
flow.
Cialis would be
So,
worthwhile here,
yeah,
right?
I mean, so it all kind of converges on the same mechanism.
Just wear some tighter pants.
Increase nitric oxide, increase blood flow, and so those will allow you to sort of train harder and by proxy, improve your VO2 max. Another supplement that I'm interested in lately, very preliminary, kind of just one study that recently came out though, is urolithin A. So urolithin A is oh my gosh, it comes like from pomegranates basically, and the elagitannins in the pomegranates get converted by gut microbiomes into urolithin A. And that appears to have some effects on mitophagy, so clearing out and reducing like damaged mitochondria and improving mitochondrial capacity. So they gave this to like trained runners in this recent study during an altitude training camp, and it improved their VO2 max. I think it was by like 5 to 10% basically. And this is in trained runners who already had a VO2 max of like 60, and I think it boosted it up to about 64 or 65 mLs per kg per minute. Yeah, at an altitude training camp. So just resuming their normal training, taking urolithin A, improve their VO2 max by like 4 to 5 mLs per kg per minute. So it's actually something that I'm thinking about taking. I mean, I'm not concerned with improving my VO2 max. I think I've pretty much hit my ceiling in terms of what I can get to, but there were some other parameters in there like lower oxidative stress and some other interesting adaptations that I was like, oh, this might be useful, but it's expensive as heck. But I'm going to reach out to these urolithin A companies and see if they want to send me some stuff
Sponsor me, dog.
try out. Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. That makes a lot of sense because urolithin A with my yeah, that makes a lot of sense. No, I appreciate. I didn't expect those answers. Those are some really good things. I mean, the nitric for sure. What about like fueling? Like obviously, like I know that when we fuel right with VO2, like you could run the same pace but at a lower VO2, for example. Like if you were to do like a gel or like ketones, like have you found like any of those to be more promising, or is it just dependent on the person? Because I do more ketones. I feel like the gels bother me, just my stomach. The ketones don't.
Yeah, I'll use both ketones and gels. I just think fueling in general, like carbohydrates, obviously, they may not actually increase your VO2 max. But again, this is one of those things that what it's going to do is improve your durability. So this physiological durability is kind of this concept that I've been really interested in lately in exercise. And it basically refers to the idea that when you start a workout, say you're going to go for a 60-minute run, your certain parameters, your VO2 max, your efficiency, your economy at the start of the run are not the same at the start as they are at the end. So if you do a VO2 max test and then you go run for 60 minutes easy and you do another VO2 max test, your VO2 max is going to be lower at the second one compared to the first. You've lost some durability. Your physiological parameters have sort of declined. And it's sort of a fuzzy concept, and we could spend like several hours on that, but I do have a couple posts on it. Maybe y'all can put that in the links or the show notes or something on durability. So, but basically if you have carbs, you're going to get less of this decline in these physiological parameters during a workout. And so again, that's going to allow you to train harder. So fueling is certainly one, but I think one of the most impactful strategies that I've looked at lately and that the research would support is heat training, hot baths and sauna. I think those are two, I would say, the most effective way to augment VO2 max adaptations when added on to a training program that you're going to find. There have been several studies lately showing post-exercise hot water baths, post-exercise sauna. You can kind of interchange the two. Hot baths are a little more a lot more people have access to that as opposed to like a sauna maybe, but it's literally similar to like altitude training in terms of the adaptations you get. You get higher hemoglobin mass, you get a higher plasma volume, you just get these insane adaptations that lead to an improvement in VO2 max just by taking, maybe 3 to 5 days per week, a hot bath after a workout. The effects are like honestly kind of mind blowing. Granted, you have to keep it up because you lose the adaptations fairly quickly, but I'm like, you got to be hot bath or sauna maxing, and that'll really help you augment your VO2 max improvement.
Well, my wife, so I tested her VO2 and she had like a 50, 53, 51 or something like that. And like technically, so she's Filipino. So like this is something that like with medicine and like longevity medicine that I'm working on in the big project is like, we don't have enough populational, like NHANES populations and things like that. Technically, I was like letting her know, I was like, first off, you're already in the superior category for women. And then she's Filipino. I'm like, you're probably in the top in that category.
Totally. How old is she?
She's 30. She's turning 30 this
year, I think. Anything above 50 puts you in that like superb category, kind of regardless of your age, I would say. Like past 30, if you're 50 or above, male or female, like obviously females are going to tend to be 5 to 10 mLs per kg lower than males of the same like age, but
her coach had her start doing like the heat stuff. We have a sauna, so she was doing it like a lot, and she really killed it on this like CIM, this California marathon. But she didn't fuel at the last 2 fuels that she was supposed to do. She just kind of got into a flow state and like forgot to fuel, but she was broken down at the end. And I was like, yeah, you can have all these parameters, but if you don't fuel, you're gonna break. Yes, and that's how like important it is.
Fueling, I don't know if I said this or if somebody else said this. It might have been me on like a podcast, but fueling basically allows you to perform to maximize what your potential is. So you're not going to become a super freak because you fueled. Like there's a certain time. So when your wife went out to run CIM, there was probably a certain time that she was ready to run on the perfect day and the perfect conditions, and adequate fueling would allow her to run that time. It's not going to allow you to run faster than you're capable of if you have 100 grams of carbs per hour, but it allows you basically to maximize your potential at whatever it is. Whereas underfueling then will say, if you're ready to run a 3-hour marathon, if you underfuel, you're going to run a 3:10. But if you're in 3-hour shape, fueling better isn't going to allow you to run 250. It's just going to allow you to run the 3 hours that you were supposed to run. So that's kind of how I like to frame it. It just allows you to unlock sort of the potential that you have trained for, essentially. It's so important. We're learning a lot about fueling lately, and I look back and I kick myself when I look back in terms of like what I was doing in college in terms of fueling, which was nothing. It was like shitty. I mean, I would do 20-mile long runs and not even have water or electrolytes or any fuel.
You just went out?
You just went out and ran, and then you came back, and then you just like went to breakfast. I was like, man,
that's youth.
It is. You get away with that stuff, but
I was wrestling in college, and like wrestling in college was already like you're so underfueled because of like weight cutting. And
absolutely,
I think I'm like, because I train now and I have to eat when I train. I'll go eat breakfast now. Like if I don't eat, I'm gonna be pissed. Whatever. And I'm like, how did 18-year-old Seamus just go out there and have 3-day tournaments and rip people's faces off, get his face ripped off, and barely eat anything and then do it again the next week. Like, it doesn't make sense.
Youth, like you said, that's the key.
I will say this in my years of coaching nutrition, and seeing the differences of like, why is it that Bishop Gorman, which is a notorious high school for football, why do they continuously create, some of the best football teams in the nation? And it's the fueling and post-workout recovery that they have access to. Like, their training is probably equally as good as some of the other people around the valley, but like, you go into their facility and afterwards it's like, take 2 scoops of this, 1 scoop of this, 2-to-1 carb to protein ratio. And it's just little things like that fueling, whether it's before or after, for the recovery side of things, makes such a world of a difference. And so, exactly what you said, and reaching it at an age that's like a 14-year-old is like, this is just the culture. And you just do it for 4 years, and then you're like, you just like, oh, where'd you learn to do that? It's like, oh, I just have always done it. They just were ingrained to do it.
Well, you don't burn out. It's like you see a lot of these kids, whether it's endurance runners or any sport athlete, it's like, yeah, man, you're beating up your body and you're not fueling it. So it's like, no wonder that like after college, like you get these endurance athletes who are just like broken and they're like, I can't run anymore because we didn't fuel properly or we didn't like take care of ourselves. And again, I was like that. And luckily I've kind of like learned, and I think I'm treating my body way better these days, which is why I can still sort of, recover and kind of perform at this level. I mean, I'm not old, I'm 32, but still it's like, I think the fueling game has really changed. And you're right, what you said, Marcos. I think about the training science. I mean, yeah, it's evolving, but everybody's on a level playing field there. Everybody knows the science of how to train at this point. Nobody's really doing anything that's radically different. It's like, how do we fuel? How do we recover? What are we doing outside of practice that's going to like help people kind of gain that edge?
Well, yeah, and I mean, I've listened to so many podcasts in the last few days, just like gut microbiota and certain differences that can lead to just performance increases and outcomes because of the recoverability and how your gut's kind of telling a story. And there's just so many like little things that are like fascinating and interesting, and like could keep your head and mind like on the pulse of those things are so cool. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask this question while it's on the top of mind, because you're talking about like being in these upper percentages. But what about the percent decrease as you age, as it relates to VO2, and how to be able to talk about that to somebody, especially with like my patients that are coming in, we'll call them my 40, 50-year-olds, right? Because Brady, in my observation, from a bike VO2 standpoint, if I have a 70-year-old, male, female, doesn't really matter. If that VO2 on a core with our specific protocol, if they're over a VO2 of 30, they are doing a really freaking job. Like, we can count on our, like on my like 2 hands, and granted it's a small population sample size, but these are people that are clearly wanting to focus more on longevity and take care of themselves. So they're putting maybe a little bit more than the average person at that age. So how does that look in terms of like that percent decrease over?
Yeah. After most of the studies would suggest after around age 40 to 50, your VO2 max starts to decline about 10% per decade. So that can translate to like 1% per year. So if you think about if you're starting your age 50, you got a VO2 max of 55. When you're 60, it's going to be, or so say it's 50 at age 50. It's going to be 45 when you're 60. It's going to be, 40 when you're 70, and then, decline kind of further from there. And that's assuming the best case scenario. If you got a VO2 max of 50 at age 50, which not a lot of people do. So 10% per decade is typically the cited rate of decline. And interestingly, what a lot of the studies then do show too is like that decline happens kind of at the same rate in athletes and sedentary people. So 10% per decade, even in people who are, generally kind of stay active. But obviously, what's the difference? Well, the active people start up here, the less active people start down here. So you have the parallel lines, but it's like the athletes are never going to reach this like incredibly low point. They're going to stay higher at any single age, probably by, 10 to 15 mLs per kg per minute or something like that.
My follow up on that too is because we work at the population base, and both of us are in longevity medicine. Like, what about like protective mechanisms of like hormones? Now that, like, for example, like the black box on women's hormones has been taken off, like more people are going to be susceptible to this, or at least like, wanting to talk about it more. And we've seen this with like thousands of patients, but like, what are like the effects on like, what would you say, like testosterone therapy, hormonal therapy, or like even peptides on maybe helping out with the longevity of the VO2?
Yeah, a lot of it may be somewhat speculation there on my part, just because I'm not like, in that area and have like done a lot of research there. But 2 things I'll note. So let's think about testosterone for men and maybe estrogen for women. So one of the reasons VO2 max does decline a lot in women and why they start suffering from cardiovascular disease earlier, or I guess after age 50 when they go through menopause, is due to that loss of estrogen, because estrogen is cardioprotective. Estrogen is great for the cardiovascular system, and loss of estrogen is going to lead to a decline in VO2 max. So, speculatively, like, yes, if you were to, get estrogen, hormone replacement therapy, that could probably help protect some of that decline. And then similar for testosterone with males, if you're going to preserve muscle mass using testosterone and maybe some of the cardiac structure as well with testosterone, similarly, maybe able to maintain some of that, maintain your VO2 max as it, would tend to decline with age. With the peptide stuff, directly probably if it allows you to train harder and recover more. So a lot of this stuff is indirectly, if you're training harder and you're pushing yourself, then you're going to be able to maintain that VO2 max. So I think one of the misconceptions, not a misconception, but, I say, it declines 10% per decade. Of course, that's on the population level on average. You can increase your VO2 max after age 50 and you can maintain it. It just probably takes a little bit more. And that's kind of why I stress, I'm an endurance junkie and I always will be, but it's why I kind of tend to stress the endurance aerobic exercise more than I do strength training a little bit, because you just have to dedicate, unfortunately, more time to aerobic training as you get older. If you want to maintain or increase your VO2 max, then you do strength training. It's like the maintenance dose of strength training to maintain like lean mass and strength is so incredibly low. It's like not fair. It's like 2 sessions per week, maybe 30, 45 minutes. If you're going really hard, you can maintain your strength and your muscle mass, and then eat adequate protein, obviously. But with aerobic exercise, it's like, unfortunately, as you get older, just due to the adaptations with the heart, cardiac adaptations, the fibrosis, heart stiffening, you just need to do a lot more and progressively maybe a little bit higher intensity, relatively for your age as you get older to maintain those adaptations. It's been pretty well studied on why that happens and that it does happen.
Quick aside to that. So, y'all are the endurance people. I would maybe I'd like to see this.
Dude, you got good endurance. What are you talking about, Marcos?
Well, I mean, here's the thing. It depends on what, like, muscular endurance versus running endurance versus all these different, versus sport endurance are 3 very different things. I learned the hard way because I was like, why does my son look like he's struggling out there running on the soccer field? And then I played an indoor soccer game as a pickup, a couple times here recently. I was like, I am effing smoked. And like, we're doing like little intervals. And yes, I'm like running around, but I'm also just trying to like, flow and pace and kind of like do it in between that. And I was technical. Like, yeah, well, I mean, I'm like the worst one out there. It's okay. But like, I was like, okay, now I get it. Like when my son literally tells me he's tired, he legit is tired. But I was like, like, I'm like, it doesn't look like he's even trying half the time. You know what I mean? Like, and he's moving effortlessly and then he's just like dead. And I was like, this is interesting. They just, like you just said, like that condition and shit. I mean, it even happened to our boys when they went to go play a game after like, quote, like a week and a half off. Right? They didn't have their normal practices. They didn't have those things. And like you just said, you quickly watched. I was like, dude, they look out of shape. It's only been 10 to 14 days, and these are kids, like they weren't not doing things actively during Christmas break, but things definitely changed,
Yeah, deconditioning happens so quickly, and then getting that fitness back happens, unfortunately, like slower, and it requires a bit more. And this is why I think the key to, if you just think about like longevity, the perspective of longevity, whether your goal is to maintain muscle mass, maintain VO2 max, it's literally like, especially as you get older, it becomes more important, but just don't take a break. You don't have to go hard all the time. You don't have to be peaking, but just like, don't take a break, because that's when the declines happen. It's not like age 50 to age 70, you just go off a cliff. It's like, oh, okay, I'm maintaining. Oh, Christmas holiday, 4 weeks, I didn't do anything. You go down. Then you maintain for a little bit more because you get back into training. Oh, then you have like a baby, so you didn't do anything for 6 months. Oh, your VO2 max declined a little bit more. There's like these, in strength training, you would refer to it as like or muscle mass wise, you'd refer to it as like a catabolic crisis. So you're in a hospital bed for like 2 weeks, you just lose a ton of muscle mass, and then you don't replace it. And as you get older, you have more of these and you go down and down and down. So it's not a linear decline, but it's like it's a sharp decline followed by some maintenance periods. And that's kind of how these declines happen, whether you're thinking about muscle mass or VO2 max. And so the key just becomes, how do you prevent that? How do you just kind of keep like a rhythm going? Like, yeah, you can take a week or 2 off at a time, but like, just don't let these massive periods of decline happen where you then have to dig yourself out of a hole, because it's hard to do. And a lot of people just simply don't do it.
The catabolic crisis. What a name for a book, man.
Man, yeah, I might have to steal that one.
Well, you said it, so it's all you.
The catabolic crisis. Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, go ahead, Marcos.
No, I'm just saying, like, that's like, I mean, everything he just described as to like why I mean, as you hear a lot of people that like have like long-term success and are doing it, well into their later years, they find a way to kind of have that, like you just said, that kind of cardiovascular thing kind of worked in appropriately and happening frequently and almost not taking a day off. But
Mhm.
the way that they've devised their schedule to help them from like a mental clarity element to keeping it there, like you just said, I mean, we've all heard it, right? Even though we're all basically the same age here, right? Like it just gets harder when you get older. And it's like, well, did it get harder because you just took too much time off and then you're trying to rebuild that, right? Like, what would have happened if you would have kept with it a little bit more to help kind of have maintenance? And like you just said, like, I don't know, like the genetic upper limit, like you just said, like reaching your ceiling for that particular thing, who knows? Like you just said, maybe you do eke out a little bit more as you get your hands on the urolithin A. It's like, oh, now I've unlocked this, but something that you might do in your mid 30s then has like a profound impact to like your 60s, which it would be like crazy to think about. Like you said, oh, I boosted my VO2 up to here. And then you basically didn't have to train nearly as hard, but you just kept in that maintenance dose, finding that maintenance dose with aerobic versus.
Yeah, that's like the funny thing about aging. We like refer to a lot of these things as, oh, it's the age-related decline in X. It's like, man, a lot of it is just inactivity related. It's not age related. Like I had this theory once. I don't know, I was like drinking beers with my friend or whatever in graduate school. I'm like, why do we have to get, if you just like take an endurance run, it's like, why do you get slower as you age? Like in theory, if every day, if I were to never just like isolate myself in this chamber and I were just to do the same workout every single day or make sure that I trained every single day from now until I'm 70, would I like decline? Could I maintain like my 5K running pace from now until age 70? If I like, the only reason you get slower is because you train less, right? So if you never train less, do you lose this capacity? I mean, in theory, you don't. And I guess like, I'm not saying aging is inevitable, isn't like everybody has to age, but we lose muscle mass, we lose VO2 max, our metabolism slows because we do less activity. And like, what happens if I just think there's this whole new generation, like us, our generation, and these people now who are like interested in optimizing health. It's like, I think that we're going to just see some interesting stuff when, I don't want it to come soon, but when we all reach like 60s and 70s and 80s, like, I think it's going to be very interesting because we started at an early age. Yeah. We're not going to stop and we're like in love with this stuff. So I don't know. It's going to be kind of cool to see.
Something that I've been thinking about a lot more. Like I have a few friends that are pros in high rocks, and like I've set myself like a 3-year goal of like, doing a lot more running now. I've gotten away from combat sports. I'm just doing more running and high rock stuff and that kind of stuff. And I was like, I'm not going to be a pro tomorrow. Give myself 3 to 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
To my 35-year-old self, I'm probably going to be peaking then. And what I realized talking to some pros that are like in their 40s, they're literally saying, well, think about it, Seamus. Like maybe you were strong when you were in college. Maybe like 20 years old, you were strong, but you probably weren't fast or like you weren't, cardio, right? Or the opposite. You had a lot of cardio, but you weren't strong. So you do a sport like high rocks. High rocks may not just be the one sport, but it's a good idea of like a, lack of a better term, hybrid athlete, because we're going to get Alex Vieda here soon, but like a hybrid person. You can't have both qualities maximized until you've practiced enough of it for a long enough time. And he goes, I'm 45 now. All those qualities are turned on for me now.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm way better than when I was at 30. And I was like, that made a lot of sense. And I agree. Like it just took a lot of time to accumulate the muscle mass, the strength, the technique, and the cardio to then blend it all together for a normal person. And probably you could be better concurrently in the 40s to the 50s to the 60s. You're not just one. So I agree. I could nerd out about this all day, Brady. It's over an hour. I know Marcos has to get going or anything. Marcos, any last questions? Or Brady, we could just close it out here, let people find you where you're at. Marcos, anything?
Yeah, no closing remarks. I think we'll maybe just have more casual conversation in the future, do a part 2 with just other things of interest and
absolutely
things. But I really appreciate you, coming out here, giving us the time, appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's fun to discuss this stuff. I think there's part of me that really just wants to simplify everything and just say like, yeah, like longevity can be like simple. It's like lift, run a little bit, eat good, do these things. And then the other part of me likes to get into the minutia. So I think there's a combination of both. And like, obviously you guys are in this space where people are really concerned about the minutia, but that stuff is like a lot of fun to me as well. So I think you got to be able to do both, whether you're an expert or not. It's just like, you can care about both of them. It's okay.
You can't get into the minutia unless you've done the basics first, though.
Absolutely.
100%. Well, Brady, what can people find you? What are you excited about? And like, just where can people, connect with you if they have any questions or anything like that?
I'm primarily active on X, so my username there is Brady H. You can find me there. Primarily, where I'm doing most of my personal content is on Substack. I write a weekly newsletter every single week, and then I also will post some videos throughout the week. I'll post some, extra content kind of when the inspiration sparks. That is physiologicallyspeaking.com. So people can sign up for that. It's free. You can support me if you want to, but it's free, and I send out, everything mostly free to everyone. So yeah, X, Substack, kind of active on Instagram, but I don't really point people there. I'm not too active there. And then you can find a lot of kind of content, I'm working obviously with Rhonda Patrick on some of that content. I'm less front facing there, kind of more like behind the scenes, but we do podcasts every now and then. We'll do some journal club episodes, some episodes on deep dives into topics. Otherwise, I would just encourage people to go and subscribe to Dr. Rhonda Patrick, because you'll indirectly be receiving some content from me that her and I are collaborating on, kind of in the longevity and health span space. So kind of that's where you'll find me. And hopefully soon I'll be posting, getting back into running. Had a little bit of an injury, but hopefully soon I'll be posting more training related content. I kind of something I've been getting into lately. People seem to be interested in, like what I'm doing for nutrition, shoes, gear, kind of my training strategies. And so I'll be prepping for like either a half or a marathon soon enough here and posting some content about that.
Awesome,
man.
Yeah. Thanks guys.